Hey, what's up guys, my name is Cherno. Welcome back to my code review series, a series in which you guys send me your code and I take a look at it. Today, we have game review Skyward Scammer, sent in by Sarab Meta. Sorry for probably mispronouncing your name. Hi Cherno, your code review series is great. I would be honored to get roasted by you. You guys know I love a good roasting. For my little SDL2 based game, Skyward Scammer. I'll have that link for you guys in the description below. It is an RPG game where the protagonist, leveraging wit and charm, scams a dealer and runs away with balloons. Are you as intrigued as I am? Because I'm pretty intrigued. Can't wait to be featured on your channel. Okay, cool. So, let's take a look at this repository. And today, I thought I would try something a little bit different because usually when I look through all of this code, I'm kind of rushing through it. I'm not going very deep into it because obviously I'm making the content for YouTube. I don't want the video to be like over an hour long, which is a bit of a shame. So today I want to try something a little bit different. I'm going to go through this code as deeply as possible and take as long as I want to. And then that full video will be published onto patreon.com/thecherno. It'll just be under the $3 tier, so hopefully pretty accessible. And then what you'll see here on YouTube is the same kind of code review that I usually make, which is just like the highlights. So if you're interested in seeing a deeper look at this code and everything that I have to say, then patreon.com/thecherno, link will be in the description below. Okay, so Skyward Scammer is a unique top-down RPG game where the protagonist, leveraging wit and charm, scams a dealer and embarks on the adventurous journey soaring above the world with balloons. This is so interesting. This project was a result of a lot of awesome online learning resources, especially JavidDX9. Anyway, one lone code I'm sure you guys know of his channel as well. Great channel on YouTube. I hope it's fun for you to play with. Now, I'm already noticing like some rendering errors here because this stuff should obviously be not rendered so that you could see the grass behind this. Same with this as well. So I've already got like a lot to say about this. So build C++ with SDL2 libraries, follow the instructions below to compile and run the game. So we need C++ compiler with C++ 17 support, decently modern, homebrew if you're on Mac, we're not on Mac, building on Mac OS or Linux. So this looks like it supports a whole bunch of platforms, which is good. SDL2 obviously supports all of these platforms, so I think it's good when someone makes the effort to make sure their game also supports that, because if SDL2, if what you're using, the libraries you're using already support it, and you're writing C++, most people write C++ in a fairly portable way, right? You're not using Win32 API, calls, especially if you're making something like a game and you're already using SDL2, you don't really need that platform layer because SDL2 exists as a platform layer. So when I see SDL2 or like SFML games that don't support anything other than Windows, then usually that's just, essentially it's like a very base level of laziness by the developer because it's really not hard to support. In fact, I think the only thing you have to do, honestly, to support other platforms is just not use Visual Studio project files. But if you use something like CMake or Premake, then I'm pretty sure that they would just be able to, like whoever downloads the code would just be able to run CMake on their platform and have it generate project files for, say, Xcode, or just like have it generate make files. And then as long as there are versions of that library available for their platform and your code obviously runs on all platforms, which it should if it's just a little game like this, then it should just work out of the box. But it won't, obviously, if you're using specific IDE project files. Like if you're on Mac using Xcode and you just commit Xcode project files, or if you're using Visual Studio and you just commit Visual Studio project files, obviously that locks you into that particular platform. So it's good to see that this has a CMake list file, so obviously it's using CMake, and it supports all of these platforms because again, the underlying core library does. All right, cool, I'm excited, let's play this game. Okay, welcome. Today you have a secret meeting with Gonzo and you have a plan to scam him. Press space to continue. Where is my stuff? Money first, it's here, take it, now give me my stuff. This is cutting edge dialogue. I don't have the stuff, haha. Catch me if you can. Run inside the building, don't let Gonzo catch you. I don't know who, is this me? I'm guessing this is me. And is this Gonzo or is this Gonzo? I'm guessing I'm talking to him, but then this is like, also looks like the same. Okay, so how do I move, man? Oh, movement is the worst thing I've ever experienced. Game over, cheating with Gonzo was a bad idea. That's kind of sad, I lost. I blame the movement. Escape to quit or space to continue? Well, space to continue doesn't work. Let's brought up a diff for some reason. Escape to quit. All right, let's try that again. Okay, their radius is pretty big, it seems. All right. Okay, so I was gonna tell me what to do now, isn't it? Oh, no. Dude, this is like legit hard though, because they're gonna get me here. I guess I'm gonna have to like, oh no. Let's let them in here. Gotta let both of them in here and then just bolt for it. Let's go, man. Let's go, Cherno. Let's go. Oh, this is pretty hard. Okay, I reckon I can cut them off here and then get out. Oh, whoa. Congratulations, you've completed the game, first of all. Was that a speed run or what? But also, what is this like 3D graphics, bro? This is cool. This reminds me of, you know, like the kind of ray casting, like, you know, cause you got your top and your bottom and it's just like, I don't know how this is rendered. I don't know if this is rendered somehow. We'll have a look at how this is rendered because this is actually piquing my interest over here. But anyway, we got some balloons. We stole the balloons. We've completed the game. What a journey. Actually, did this game have sound? I don't even know. We will find out in the edit if this game had sound. Okay, cool. But where are we the scammer? Did we scam them by stealing balloons from their shop instead of buying them? Because if so, feels a bit rough. Also, can I just mention that I absolutely love like the tiling of this, like just the fact that this texture does not tile whatsoever, but it's just so confidently used like it does tile. Like that is the best. The balloons aren't even aligned. I mean, I guess they're supposed to be on his hand, but they look like they're kind of converging over here. What else? I mean, the horizon is just a black line. And then I love these little pixels that we have here. I guess where the textures join up, which is quite fun. Anyway, that was a journey. Let's have a look at the code. Now, if you too want to make amazing games such as this one, but you're just a beginner in your programming journey, then I highly recommend that you take a look at Brilliant.org, the sponsor of this video, because they have an amazing 30-day free trial that will help get you started. Brilliant.org, for those of you who don't know, is an amazing website filled with lots and lots of really high quality courses on various STEM topics. Computer science and math are my favorite courses on their platform, and their computer science course is fantastic for beginners because it doesn't focus on any specific language, but rather the whole concept of programming. They teach you how to think like a programmer, and not just by playing you a series of videos that you can zone out to. No, this stuff is super engaging and interactive. They'll have you like drag these things around to build up the control flow of the program, as well as constantly quiz you to make sure that you're paying attention, learning, and remembering the information that they're teaching you. But then this amazing way of teaching extends also into their math courses, which go down all the way to the beginning level, but then through to more complicated things like algebra, linear algebra, and calculus. And in my opinion, math is best taught visually, and that's exactly what Brilliant does. Now, as I mentioned, they currently have a 30-day free trial that you can use to take a look at all of the courses on their platform. Just go to brilliant.org/thecherno, link will be in the description below. And if you do go on to like it, then that link will get you 20% off a premium annual subscription. Huge thank you to Brilliant.org, as always, for sponsoring this video. Okay, so let's dive into the code and take a look. So the main function that we've already looked at a little bit just makes this class instance on the stack. Very well done. This is looking good so far. Calls init on it and calls start game loop. All right, so if we go into RPG game, so this is a subclass of game engine, which is very interesting. It's also got a lot of variables over here. So I don't know what we should start with. We could start with game engine. So we create a whole bunch of static stuff. So this I'm not really fond of at all. This is really weird to me. Oh my God. So this is just static. So why is this even like a base class? We do have virtual functions here, but we've also got static bool drop points. When did I talk about this? I think I talked about this I'll have the video linked up there, but it's the one where I talk about singletons and why I don't like singletons and why I wouldn't do anything like this. I'll try and put the timestamp of where I talked about this in the video on screen, but inside that video, I talked about how, in my opinion, structuring code like this really works well if you structure it like a tree. So you have like your game engine, sure, which is your root, but then it has a window that is part of it, and then the window might have some other dependencies that are part of it, and then you have like this tree basically that forms from that, where if you drop the window, like you have to restart the window or whatever, you can drop that, and then everything that stems from it also gets destroyed, and then you can recreate it if you need to. So what I don't understand here is why any of this stuff needs to be static, because again, if we look at main and we look at RPG game, we obviously only have one instance of this. I think what's happening over here is simply, I think, the inexperience of C++ to be able to come up with a better way to access API that you need to access. And that also could be expanded to include data as well, not just specifically the API. One thing that people do commonly, and again, this is commonly found with beginners. I used to do this as well, by the way, all the time. Just make stuff static, because then you can access it from everywhere, right? Public static just means that whatever class I'm in inside my program, I can just call draw text, and that's fine. But then as you write more and more code and you begin to write more complex code, suddenly you begin to realize that that might not cut it, because not everything is simple enough for you to just be able to globally have a context for these functions and functionality, essentially, right? So what I mean by that is like renderer. You might have more than one renderer, or you might have more than one font, for example. You might have a context within where you want to call this stuff. Now, I don't know if MWindow and MRenderer are a good example of things you might have multiple of, because like a window is classically something that you just have one of. But the point is, there might be context to you drawing a point. It might not just be as simple as like, hey, I want to draw a point. It's like, okay, where do you want to draw a point? Like on what kind of, draw point uses what? It uses first of all, it's a state machine here because it sets the render draw color, but then also like it takes in a renderer. And so you might want a little bit more control to specify what kind of renderer you're using to draw this point. So typically the way that we would structure something like this instead is like none of this stuff would probably be static. They would just be private inside the game engine. And then we could provide a means to actually get the current renderer context or whatever. And from there, do the rendering that we need to, for example. Okay, so let's take a look at what this actually does. So, quick little revision of structure here. So we have RPG game, which is a game engine, right? RPG game itself has no constructor, but obviously game engine does. So we're gonna actually end up going into game engine. And then look, that actually initializes SDL in it. So see, this is what's odd to me. This is the worst of both worlds that we just talked about, because RPG game, the way that this class is set up is it basically defers or delays its initialization until an explicit call to the init function. Because RPG game, as we saw, has no constructor, right? So init is the function within RPG game that actually decides to, create like a window in the renderer and do all of the initialization stuff. The only thing the constructor does, because there is no constructor, it's just the default invisible constructor, is it will obviously go through and initialize all of the variables that we have, all of our members over here. So things like the script processor, that will be initialized. And if that has a constructor, which it does, we'll call the constructor function, and we'll go through and initialize all those things, but we're not specifically initializing, let's just say, the SDL window. So it seems like, it's like, okay, cool. Well, I like to write things like this where I defer that. But then, since RPG game is a subclass of game engine actually does have a constructor, and that constructor does a whole bunch of work. So this is definitely something I wouldn't do. I would be like, okay, well, if you are calling init on this, what seems to be the whole game, then I would probably also make game engine have, an init function, because again, this is all your code, right? So this is inside a simple game engine, which is in a different module, right? This is a static library. However, I'm guessing this is your code. Maybe it's not though, because then that would somewhat make sense. But anyway, I would just make an init function inside the game engine class if you wanted to stick to that. And that way you could just make, let's see. Oh, hang on. Oh, whoa. This just took a turn. So I thought this init function was inside RPG game, but RPG game doesn't have an init function. It's got on init, which I'm guessing gets called from the game engine because it's a virtual function. All right, so what you're telling me here is that this actually does half of the initialization here and the second half of the initialization here. And I'm guessing the reason why it does the second half of the initialization here, for whatever reason, is just because this allows us to specify parameters. Parameters which we could, of course, have specified in the constructor arguments anyway. But like this initializes SDL and does a whole bunch of stuff because they're all in one class. That's the thing, right? So here's the constructor that does half the initialization, and then here's the init function, which does the second half of the initialization. So this is kind of hilarious. I think that you should definitely stick to one thing here. Like just make it the init function do everything, or make the constructor do everything. But don't have this weird thing where half the stuff happens here and half the stuff happens here. Okay, so after the init function, which we've just called, we call start game loop. And that's kind of the beginning of this. So we have bool quit equals false, and quit is inside this function. So that's already a bit weird to me, because how are we gonna control that from elsewhere? So we try and initialize a bunch of systems essentially, and then if they fail, we just call quit equals true. And then that's basically just means that if any of these systems fail to initialize, then we just skip the main loop. So we try and create resources. So what does that mean? So we open a font. Okay. So, I mean, I think this is okay. I was going to say that like, it's a little bit weird that we're loading resources maybe from within this API, but it's not really, because you probably want your game engine to have like a default font, just load it up. And the reason for that is because you want to be able to display messages on the screen potentially, right? Or even errors on the screen. And obviously to render those, you're going to have to load up some font. So I guess I'm okay with this being something that ships with the game engine essentially. And it's just something that is used internally. And then obviously a game would most likely potentially not want to use Roboto to render its text, right? Because that's quite a plain kind of UI font. You might have something different, for example, especially for a game like this one. And so you could load your own font, but this is just the font that's used internally by the game engine. What I would recommend doing for something like this is actually embedding this font. So what you can do is you can just grab this file, take the bytes from the file, and then embed them into your CPP file, right? So that's something that I've done quite a bit with like different resources in Hazel. Basically, I just wrote like a Python script that reads a file like in binary and then takes like every byte from that file as a hexadecimal like representation basically. And then it outputs like it outputs a file that is essentially a header file that is kind of like, you know, char, you know, whatever you want to call it, bytes or whatever, equals, and then it's just got like, you know, all the actual bytes of the file like this. And then you can include that header file, obviously change the name if you want to. You can include that header file in like a CPP file, and then obviously you have that entire embedded file within your actual C++ code. And also I think it probably specifies like the size as well of this. All right, so next up we init the screen, just, yeah, basic initialization stuff. I'm gonna try and skim through this. On init is when we call back into our RPG game instance to do stuff that I guess is relevant to our game. And what is, oh my goodness, the stuff that is going here. So because this is static, this would enable the subclasses to access the game objects as well. This is some mess of an architecture. Define assets to RPG assets get. Okay. All right. So, this is disgusting. I'm sorry. Like there's no, I could sugarcoat this, but I'm not going to. So sure, you don't like having to call RPG assets get, which by the way is exactly what I would have recommended you do for the game engine instead of making all the members static. But anyway, so then just bring it out. Yeah, just bring it out. So what does this return? It returns a reference to RPG assets. I don't know if this needs to be const or not, but just make an alias basically for it here, right? Like assets, yeah? Which is what you've used here. And then just use that. Like, yes, you need this line of code here rather than having a macro. But macros, like, you want to avoid them as much as possible, especially for something as simple as this. Yeah, not worth the macro, not worth the issues that could come from that. Just do something like this instead. And it also, as a little added bonus, actually allows you sometimes to maybe retrieve this as a const instance if you need to do that. And there could be some situations in which you might need to, again, not like in this case, like, you know, because I was thinking you could have two versions of get where one is const, one is not const, in case you somehow wind up with an instance of RPG assets that is const, but obviously this is static, so that doesn't apply. Not to mention this singleton situation is something I made a whole video about, which I'll have linked up there. I think it's already linked actually from earlier in the video. But anyway, it just allows you a little bit more control over here, which I think can help a lot. Okay, so we have a fixed array here of 30 strings that are our sprite names. So they're just strings though. So they're not actually the locations of these, like they're not actually the sprites themselves. They're just strings. So how does this get initially populated? Oh, oh, I see. So RPG assets loads everything here. All right. So what looks like is happening here is every single sprite that is within these directories, I'm guessing this is a directory and then that's something inside the directory. Every single thing here is you know, being manually written out in the actual source code. And also they're in a fixed array, by the way. So every time you want to add a sprite, you have to increment that. And then you obviously have to add something into here. Every time you rename something, you also have to deal with it here. What I would do if you really set on this approach of using actual strings as IDs for assets, which in a more serious project, I probably would use asset handles for many different reasons. But anyway, if you're set on doing that, just have the file system API retrieve a listing, recursively of your resources or assets directory, and then have it add every, image file type, for example, so PNG, JPEG, whatever you decide to support, have that just add that to this sprite names thing, right? And of course you can trim off the extension from the end, but maybe keep the path if you wanted to, and you will end up with exactly this list. But the difference is, if you add a new sprite, you simply pop it into the folder and your engine just picks it up, or your game just picks it up automatically. So we're going here, we're creating a new texture, which a texture by itself, I think it's gonna have an STL texture inside it, which it does, just the default constructor, which does nothing. And then you obviously load texture either from text or from file. Okay, right. Okay, so there's a few things going on here. First of all, never copy strings like this. Const reference, please, or string view. Second of all, shouldn't even be a string in the first place. Same with this file path over here. Use the file system API. You're in C++ 17, which is when it was introduced. So std file system path, which again, you can also use for seeing all of this contents in the directory. And then you just do base path, slash all of these things, right? To create this, you're gonna have to also include file system for that to work. And then, so if we get rid of that, then load texture from file should obviously take that in, but if you do need to convert it to a string, then you can just call .string and it will be converted into a string. Now, since base path is not a path to begin with, I guess we have to wrap it like that. So that's what it looks like. And then we need to not forget the semicolon. Okay, so that's what I would convert it to. But again, I would also have load texture from file, take in a file system path instead. So basically, stop using strings for paths. Never use strings for paths, use std file system path. Okay, and then we in place back the texture, which is fine. Push back in place back makes no difference in this case because we're just storing a vector filled with raw pointers. Speaking of which, should these be shared pointers? Maybe. It depends. I think that there are some reasons where using shared pointers, which obviously I think vastly go over the scope of this particular application, but there are lots of reasons why I like storing resources as shared pointers. I mean, like in Hazel, we don't really use shared pointers that much because we've got our own reference counting system, which is an intrusive reference counting system, which is quite popular for game engines, especially ones with multi-threaded renderer designs, because the idea is that by having something that effectively works like a shared pointer, it means that when you have multiple threads that might be using a resource, you're definitely not going to delete it before all threads are done with it. Because since it is an atomically reference counted system, the resource will only be deleted once the reference count hits 0, which will only happen when every single thread has released it. So that is where that obviously matters a lot. In this case, you have to explicitly delete this texture, which again, it's probably not worth even talking about this because in a game such as this one, your lifetime of your assets is probably you load them at the start, and you delete them at the end. If you even delete them, maybe you just close the application and you're done, right? So this isn't something that obviously happens often. So the lifetime really isn't complex. You're not constantly deleting assets that aren't in view or freeing assets from memory that aren't used anymore as your game continues, which you might do in a much larger, more complicated game. Instead, it's very, very simple, so it probably doesn't matter too much. Okay, that's how we load all the assets, and then we can reference them by name throughout our application. There's still so much stuff to look at. We've got this pathfinder, we've got this pseudo 3D plane. Maybe, oh, the 3D plane, that's what I really wanted to look at. Oh, you know what? We might look at this in the next video. Oh, this stuff looks really interesting. So we might take a look at the whole 3D, pseudo 3D plane, apparently situation stuff that I was kind of excited at in the beginning of this video. In the next video, let me know if you want to see that. Did you guys enjoy this code review? What did you think of the code? What did you think of my comments? Do you disagree? Do you agree? Do you have more stuff to say? Leave all of that in the comments section below. Don't forget, you can send me your code by sending an email to chernoreview@gmail.com. That email address along with instructions is also in the description below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.